Good evening, everyone. I have to say, this is the first time that I have sat in a comfy chair to do a lecture wearing my slippers. And I hope that you are all in similar circumstances. Right, now, the rise and decline of Druce Farm Roman Villa. Why isn't it going? Wait a minute. Oh, excellent. Now, Druce Farm is about 4 miles from the county town of Dorchester to the west of where you're all living. And the site was spread over 2 fields, Lower Lime Pits and 11 acres. The map at this side shows the farm, and the red square is where the villa is. I directed excavations on behalf of the East Dorset Antiquarian Society, and we went in 2011 at the behest of local metal detectors who had found Roman artifacts in Lower Lime Pits field, this field here. The field, that part of the field was absolutely covered with Roman building material and Roman pottery. A geophysical survey took place, and you can see on the survey there are 3 areas where there were potential buildings, and these were defined by what looked like large enclosures. The excavations took place between 2012 and 2018 over a 4.2 acre site, and this is a plan of our excavation. It wasn't an open area excavation. We did trenches. We're very fortunate that we had our own it was a 60-year-old JCB excavator, and the excavator took soil off as and where we wanted. So what I'm going to do is to go through chronologically what happened on the site, how the buildings developed, and then I will conclude by showing you some of the finds that came up in the excavations. So the earliest period dates to about 43 to 70 CE, which is incredibly early, particularly for Dorset. And the blue map on the left-hand side shows you the features which were up and running at that time. And you can see this enclosure system. You can see a building. This is a cesspit here and some activity areas. The enclosures were basically large ditches, and they're cut into chalk. And because of the size and the shape of them, we felt that these were probably dug by the military. Those corners are absolutely straight. They're not like the fortress ditches, which tend to be a little curved. These are absolutely 90-degree corners, absolutely fabulous. And the ditches subsequently were used as rubbish dumps, where, as you can see, this is really early pottery and animal bone, which were tipped in. And you can, this is actually, there's not a lot of photos of me excavating, but I'm excavating the ditch, and you can see very, very large pieces of Gauloise 5 wine amphora coming up, and that's dated to about 50, 100. Also, we had within the ditch, we had lots of fragments of really early Roman glass. And this is the glass that we excavated. You can see one of the drawings from the volume. And this complete vessel is from Hadrian's Wall. It gives you an idea what this tableware looked like. Really high class. There's a piece from an amber bowl and small glass little jars and drinking cups. Large quantities of really early Roman glass. But the interesting thing was the building, and we called it the ancillary building. The building was started about 60, which again is incredibly early. Dorchester, the county town, the Civitas capital, was founded about the similar sort of date. But it's the first building, the first non-military building in the county, and it's built in the Roman style. It's got mortared flint walls. You can see with the arrow pointing to it, all the glass and the pottery I've shown you came from just outside the building. It had 3 rooms, and one of them, you're going to see a plan in a moment, was defined by this row of nails. Can you see them on the bottom of the picture here? I've spread them out. And my expert said that they defined a sprung wooden plank floor. And it was really difficult to try to find parallels for such a feature. Here's a plan of this ancillary building, and it was built on a slope. But what was interesting is that it did have military links. And first of all, I'm going to show you a piece of mortaria, because of course these grinding pots came with the army. This is a particularly interesting one because it has an ownership graffiti on the base of it. This one, I have to say, wasn't found at Druce Farm, but it shows you what a complete mortaria would look like. So mortaria introduced by the military in the east part of the country, and then they filtered westwards. What we also have are fragments, these horrible little fragments of Lyonware. And this type of pottery, which is made in France, is not a common find, and it's generally associated with the army in the legions. And by about 70, it goes out of production, as does this pottery here. This is a locally made flagon, and it's called Corfe Mullenware, and it's white. And it was associated with the 2nd Legion Augusta, who were based at the legionary fortress of Lake, which is just outside Wimborne, which I guess is about 10 miles from Druce Farm. They left Lake Fortress and then moved on to Exeter between 50 and 60 AD. And then Corfe Mullenware was not, the pottery sites were closed down. But most interesting is this piece of black burnished ware. And it's a black burnished ware drinking cup dating to the 1st century. And can you see that it's got a graffiti? It's got a name inscribed. The name, according to Roger Tomlin, is Martialis, and that is a military name. Men whose fathers were in the army named their children such names. So really strong links with the army at a very, very early date. So here we've got the ancillary building. South of that was a cesspit. A slightly later ditch was dug over the top of it. Here we can see the cesspit here. And at the base of this cesspit, we found this piece of ironwork. And it took a little bit of digging, but it turned out that it was a strap from a bucket where the handle was attached. And here you can see a similar one here. Never quite know what you're going to dig up when you start digging up Roman sites. So what I'm going to tell you now, that was the first building on our site, and it was about there. The development of the villa complex took place over about 250, 300 years. And you can see what it looked like in its final stages in the 4th century. So I'm going to take you now through what happened on the site, and we're going to look at the 3 buildings. There is an east range, there is a northern domestic range, and there is a range of workshops. And in their final form, you can see that these were quite magnificent buildings, but we'll see how they developed over time. I'm going to talk first about the East Range. And Barry Cunliffe, who was involved with us when we were excavating it, said this building in its final form, which is phase 3 and 4, was an aisled hall. It wasn't a barn. This was a very high status building. But as you can see, there were 4 phases to its development. The first phase was a rectangular building, and it was defined by 2 sets of ovens, multi-oven here with 3 little ovens all joined together and a further oven to the south. It had a southern entrance with a small room in front. What was interesting about the oven is that those copious charred seeds came from this oven, and the seeds comprised dyer's weld and wheat. Now, we know about wheat being ground down to feed people, but dyer's weld yields a yellow dye. And in fact, dyer's weld was found in this building throughout its occupation. So it hints that there's some sort of fabric processing going on as well. The second phase, the building was extended north, and an opus signinum floor was laid. And the major event was the insertion of, it's a little rectangular, well, I don't know quite how to describe it. It was upstanding. You can see it on this picture here. This is a drone photograph. It was upstanding. It was lined with opus signinum. But it didn't have any outlet for any liquids to drain out. So what its purpose was, we don't know. It may have been associated with the dyeing process I've just talked about. When it went out of use, it was filled with debris, and we're going to come onto that in a moment. The third phase entailed a major rebuilding, and all the rebuildings, the western wall was more or less kept intact. The new phase was the aisled hall, and you can see it's got 6 piers, and they supported timbers for the roof. The rectangular tank survived, and it was still freestanding. So it was about, I guess it was about 40 centimetres above the floor level. However, about 350, there was a catastrophic fire, and so bad that the roof, the apex of the roof fell in. You can see it here. And these are this is from the inside of the roof tiles, the tegula, and this is cement which cemented them together. So these lines are where the imbrex went on either side, and here we've got where the rounded piece of the tegula on top. Is that right? Have I got it the right way around? I have, yeah. The phase 4, the rebuilding, which happened about 350, the aisled hall was extended north, and 2 further piers were inserted, and it's likely that it was subdivided into rooms. We didn't excavate in this area, and I shall tell you why in a moment. As I said, Barry Cunliffe said this is an aisled hall and not a barn. This is a medieval barn, and it is using very, very similar plinths which support the timbers, which in turn support the roof. And we only had one of those plinths which survived. You can see it here. And that little cutout is exactly 1 square Roman foot. And here we've got one of it's a fabulous little oven which was constructed in that last phase. And here is a reconstruction of what this aisled hall would have looked like in its heyday. As I say, it was used for administration, domestic and small-scale processing. Associated cesspits and pits yielded copious artifacts as well as fabulous environmental evidence. You can see this one went down to, this was used as a cesspit, but it started life as a well. And my excavator here went down 3.5 meters, and then health and safety decreed that she could go no further. So there's no doubt fabulous evidence still in situ there. In the 6th, 7th century, the building collapsed, and you can see the sequence here. You can see the roof collapses, the timbers give way and the roof collapses. The roof is fabulous, big Purbeck limestone roof tiles, but it was decorated with slate, grey slate, which came from quarries in Somerset. And you can see the sequence. Once the roof's gone, the walls fall in, and the wall, this is flint from the walls on top. This picture actually shows you the courses of flint as they fell down the walls. We had a visit from experts. This was 2012, 2013 when this was excavated. And the experts said, don't excavate under the fallen wall. So we didn't. And I'm sure there's fabulous archaeology still underneath this area, which was never excavated. So the Alt Hall, we're going to move on. There's a lot to get through, so really I'm cherry picking, and I hope this is going to give you a good idea of what the villa was looked like and something about the people who were living there. The North Range was the domestic range, and it comprised reception and service areas. But the development took place over about 200 years. This is obviously the latest phase, and we can see that we've got one area here with reception and service areas, and another area here with reception and service areas. But can you see that ploughing, which is along this line here, has destroyed most of the, well, nearly all the mosaics. This room here, the mosaic survived because this was lower than this range here and pot, but you can see the plough line going all the way across. The North Range, there were at least 12 rooms, and all of the rooms were numbered with N for North, and all the walls were numbered 2. Room N9, which was one of the latest rooms to be built, it looked as though in that corner where the pointer is, there was a staircase leading up to a 2nd floor, and that was why the reconstruction has a 2nd floor. And we're going to come back to room N3, but as you can see from the inset, this was an incredibly complex little room. So we're going to start with N3, and the first phase building went up about 70 CE, and it's outlined in grey here with N3 at its western end. And you can see that the walls, the western walls are defined, the corners are defined by very large blocks of perfect limestone. The wall itself is mortared herringbone masonry using the local flint. And this is the end of our excavation, and this is the northwest corner of this first room here. And you can see that this corner here is down here. It was a strip building. This is a strip building from South Shields, but this gives an idea what this building would have looked like. It's the first time that such a building has been found in Dorset. They are common in the east of the country and in the south of the country, but this is a first for this part of Britain. Bathhouse. We looked and we looked and we just didn't find a one. So here we've got the strip building and we've got the first eastern range, and we still have the ancillary building up. There should have been a bathhouse. We didn't find any evidence for underfloor heating in any of the archaeology relating to the villa. So it must have come from some heated room somewhere. Was it a bathhouse? In 2024, a group of us came back to the site. This is where the villa was. This is 11 acres. This is where lower lime pits, 11 acres, the ancillary building here. And this is the River Piddle is just out of focus here. And we thought that there might be a bathhouse in this area. And we found, as you can see, evidence for flint walls. And the major evidence, and I'm sorry it's not a better photo, these are great fat pieces of big Roman tiles called tegula bipedalis. And they are always associated with floors, which again are associated with underfloor heating. So did we have a bathhouse down this part of the site? We're all getting old, and the thought of excavating, it was on a very steep slope. We've got geophysics and radar surveys, and if there is a bathhouse there, that would be for archaeologists to excavate in the future. So going back to the North Range, our phase 2, we have evidence for a very large apsidal room, and this is the plan. And my expert was the late Mark Corney, who was really puzzled with this, and he said the only parallels are buildings at Fishbourne and Southwick in Sussex, where they are very large, grand reception areas. So was ours such a building? And were there plans to extend the small villa, which never really happened? And we couldn't excavate any further because there were mosaics on top of it, and we didn't want to destroy the mosaics. So again, that is work for the future. So that phase is dated 120 to 200. Phase 3, the apse here was demolished. A corridor was put onto the front of the building, and rooms N6, N7, N8 and N10 were extended north, and there was a new west wing constructed. All of that dates to about 200, and these mosaic floors were laid at that time, so a really early date for mosaics to be laid. Room N6, where the arrow is pointing to, was a plain red floor. One has to presume that any windows would have been in the north wall, because there was another room in front of it, but it did possess a fireplace, and it was reckoned that this was perhaps a winter dining room. The floor itself was interesting. You can probably see from the big picture that there are little scraps of white in amongst the red tessera, which were used mainly for the floor. These are white limestone, and it was thought that they might just represent constellations, but we didn't have any astronomers who were able to say whether it was or whether it wasn't. What was interesting, and bear in mind this is about 200, that many of the tessera were chopped up box flue tiles. So wherever those box flue tiles were in use, some of them were being chopped up to lay the floor in room N6. Room N7, next to it, here, was a checkerboard mosaic floor using chopped up tessera and two different sorts of limestone. What was interesting is this photo was taken when it was quite damp. When it dried up, you couldn't tell the difference in the sources of the limestone. They both dried really white. And at a later stage, the edges of the floor had gone and they were really mended, not very well, with just bits of limestone. Have to point out that our major rooms also had skirting boards made of opus signinum, because of course all the walls had painted plaster, and you didn't want your expensive decoration being knocked by slaves who knocked furniture up against the walls. Room N10, which is next to, or was next to it, only a tiny portion of this mosaic survived. And here you can see it's here. This is the sainted Sir Barry Cunliffe, who discussed with me the possibility of another floor underneath. And you can see the floor, which dates probably to about 300, 350. And then underneath, totally different tessera from an earlier floor, which dated to the same date as the checkerboard and the red mosaics. And this little picture just gives an indication of how those floors were formed. The corridor, which fronted those rooms, was also flawed because we had lots and lots of pieces of tessera, mosaic floor from the floor of this. It was also painted, the lot of painted wall plaster, which indicates that this was an enclosed corridor and not an open one. The interesting thing, it looks quite wide there, but it was only about 1.3 metre wide, so two people walking along would be a bit of a squash and a squeeze. I think most corridors are about 3 metres on villas. Room N3 was the most complex, and it took a lot of understanding. You can see the little plan to the right of this, and it was in 4 phases. I've already explained about this is the limestone plinth at the northern end, which puzzled us for about 2 years until the room was extended. What you can see here is the last phase, and this is the base for probably an oven. But if we go to the next picture, you'll get a good idea of what this looked like. So this is the half cellar, and it was constructed basically on the chalk. And you can see all the various walls which were constructed in the various phases. But by between 300 and 350, the cellar was infilled with masses and masses of rubbish, ash, bone, old building material, pottery, you name it, and it was deposited there. As a result, we had some slumping, and you can see how far it slumped. That's the top where the floor was constructed on solid bedrock, and it slumped by about 20 centimetres. That must have been a shock for anybody who was in the room at the time. But fabulous remains still surviving. And at about that date, at the date when the room was infilled, the western extension was refurbished and a new floor was laid. And as you can see, it's got a swastika motif in the centre, and it's plain grey and white. Really, it's beautifully made and really quite simple, with some later mends. There's a kitchen here and an anteroom here. Right, I'm going to very quickly move on because I'm aware of time going. The West Range, which was the workshop range. And as you can see from this picture, there are two phases: a single room, which was constructed about 120, went out of use about 250, and that was succeeded by 4 rooms, substantial building. And even though it was workrooms, it was constructed to the same high standards of the rest of the building. It contained 4 ovens, and they were associated with ironworking and tesserae making. Really, really substantial features. We're going to move out of the West Range. So here we've looked at the Alt Hall, we've looked at the North Range, and we've looked at the West Range. Outside the complex, by this time, the ancillary building had gone out of use, and dating to about, in use between about 200 and 350, was a fabulous corn dryer, constructed out of Purbeck limestone, T-shaped, with a stoke pit at the eastern end. And when the dryer went out of use, a cow had been buried in the stoke pit. Here's my excavator excavating the cow. Our bone expert came to have a look as the cow was being excavated, and she said, that's really interesting, but you realise there's something underneath the cow. And it was a human skeleton. It was an adult male who died between 240 and 381. And he had horrendous injuries to his skull and to his right arm. It was the sort of injury where you would hold your arm up to defend your head. And he'd actually, the injuries had got better, but at some stage he died, and he was buried, we don't know why, as an offering. It was we had no other adult burials on the site. Was he an outcast? Was he an outsider? Did his injuries, were people afraid of him because of the consequence of his injuries? Of course, we'll never know. Ancient DNA, ancestral DNA might answer some of those questions, but until that is forthcoming, we can just guess at why he was buried where he was. We had 20 infant burials at Druce Farm, and as you can see, 4 were buried in room N3, the complex room. 3 were buried in the room with the very large oven in the West Range, and others were buried in ditches and in middens around the site. This is not uncommon. Bucknell Roman Villa in Purbeck, which is probably about 20 miles from Druce, there were 60 infant burials. At Dewlish Roman Villa, which is literally only about 3 miles away, there were 10. And at Maltravers, which is another one of my sites, it was a Roman farm site with fabulous built barns. We had 20 infant burials in one of our barns. At Druce, there may well have been more burials, but because we were excavating in small areas, and many of our ditches were not fully excavated, it's likely that that total was higher. And I'm sure you know that the Romans didn't deem infants to be mature until they cut their first teeth, and they often weren't named until they did so. Infant mortality, well, it wasn't exactly a problem, it was a fact of life. And I think that one of the things that I wonder is, were our infants belonging to the elite buried in the North Range, and were the infants who were buried in and around the site belonging to their retinue and their slaves? Ditches and middens were a big feature of the excavation, and here I've put the site plan on, and the little black lines show where all the archaeological interventions on the ditches, where we had 4 middens. One of them was absolutely massive, and this is where all the site rubbish went. Huge numbers of finds. So by 350, this is the architect's plan of what Druce Farm Roman villa looked like. It's very small as villas go, very compact, probably with a wall around it and gardens. But as you can see, the buildings were of incredibly high standard. This is our architect, who's one of my neighbours, and the late Anthony Beeson and the late John Bithell, who advised the architect on what the building might have looked like, but the reconstruction is based on the wall plan. So I'm sure this is probably a good idea of what this building would have looked like. We have conflicting evidence for the abandonment. We have mosaic. If this mosaic goes in between about 300, 350, it's mended at some stage. Anthony Beeson thought that there may have been a piece of furniture here, and when it was moved, it may have compromised the mosaic. But you can see there are a number of mends on this particular floor. A coin from the House of Theodosius, 388 to 395, was found in the corner, and a type 815 black burnished ware bowl dating to 350 to 430. My husband's just bought me a drink of water. I promise it's not gin. Thanks, Mike. So these finds would indicate that people were using this room at those dates. However, when it was abandoned, this is the floor, this is the roof collapsing, and then the wall collapsing on top of it, but there was a layer of soil which accumulated before the roof collapsed. And within that soil were literally hundreds of thousands of tiny, small mammal bones. And they came from barn owl pellets. We sent some away for radiocarbon dating, and we had the biggest ones we could find, which came from water vole. And the dates that were returned were 361, 3112, plus or minus 30 years, which means that even in the 390s, that's just possible, but this early date really can't be right. So the evidence is quite tricky for when this room was actually abandoned. But the building certainly collapsed. The top picture here, the grey area, shows where we found collapsed roofing. So this is the North Range, and this is room N1 where the mosaic was, and we can see the floor, the roof fall with the wall on top. And within the wall matrix, we had 2 wonderful pieces of masonry, one from a little pillar and one from an architrave. And this is the sort of pillar, it's from a window opening from that room, probably a window sited here. So this is more or less where those 2 pieces of masonry came from. This is the workshop range, and here you can see just what this looked like. All of this as collapsed wall with the roof underneath that, and then the features underneath that as well. Now I'm going to do a very quick whiz through life at the villa, and this will just give you an idea about the sort of people who were living there and the sort of lifestyle that was being lived. So I have said the designs and the materials reflected social status and taste. And that was evident in the designs of the mosaic floors and in the wall plaster. And there were fabulous quantities of this. We also had one very small piece of glass tessera, which I'm led to believe is quite rare and very high status. The pottery, 84% of the pottery was locally made black burnished ware. We've already had a little discussion of that. No complete pieces, but this picture gives you an idea of what the vessels looked like when they were whole, and it was kitchenware. Vessels included cooking storage jars, bowls, dishes, flagons, jugs, beakers, tankards, lids, colanders, and strainers. And it also included the last of the black burnished ware pottery to produce. It's not black and it's not burnished. It's called South East Dorset Orange Wiped Ware, and it was produced between 370 and 430. High crust rim and perforations in the body and in the rim and on the base. And as yet, no one has got a function for what this large type of storage jar was used for. We had mortaria used for grinding and pulping. You saw some of the earliest. We had mortaria from the Oxford potteries, from the New Forest potteries, and from Germany. We had stone mortars, unfortunately not whole, just pieces. These were produced in Purbeck, which is where I live, on a vast scale in the Roman period, and we had a complete little elbow pestle. And these are used for pulping and grinding. Lots of millstones and querns, non-whole, but very, very large fabric pieces. This was a daily task as flour couldn't be stored. Barry Cunliffe suggested that we may have some sort of mill buildings down by the River Piddle. And again, that may be something for archaeologists in the future to look at. We had Samian pottery from Gaul, dating from about 43 to 250 when the pottery sites went out of use. This is from Hadrian's Wall, and none of ours was complete, but we had all the different styles of Samian pottery. Fairly high class wares, lots of drinking cups. This is going to be a theme. We had New Forest pottery, which replaced the Samian, and that comes in about 250. You can see that this is a picture showing what the complete vessels look like, and we had fragments from nearly all of the New Forest types. But when I say fragments, I really mean fragments. We had Oxfordshire fine wares, and again, most of them were drinking cups. I think you might be getting the picture here. Continental pottery, we had the mortaria, but we also had, again, lots of cups for drinking. Fabulous cups from the Mosul ceramic black slipware industry and Central Gaulish black slipware. Amphora contained wine, olive oil, fish sauce, and dates. And we had lots of fragments of amphora going right through the period of occupation. Utensils for cooking and eating. copper alloy spoons, the top here, a little bone spoon minus its handle, lot of knives and sharpening stones to sharpen the knives. Glassware in fragments, including some quite high status glassware. This is from the British Museum, and you can see this little cup has got little blue blobs on it, and we had a very, very similar one. But the most exotic glassware was this. It's very small. These fragments are the size of your fingernail, small fingernail, and it's called snake's thread glass, made in Cologne in Germany, and it doesn't survive intact in Britain. Absolutely high class and incredibly expensive. We also had quite a lot of locally made shale objects, Kimmeridge shale. Kimmeridge shale occurs on the coast, and it was used from the Neolithic period onwards and making, we've got pot of bowl, but shale trays were the objects which were sent all over the country. Extensive environmental remains, including animal bone and charred seeds. And as you can see, I've noted that we had cattle, sheep, goat, pig, deer, hare, horse, birds, fish, shellfish, charred plants, and charcoals. And I have to add that as well as hare, we had rabbit as well. Fashion, we had hairpin. Well, I say hairpins. I think perhaps some of these larger copper alloy pins may have been used to fasten cloaks and things, but ladies used such pins for their elaborate hairstyles. Jewelry and grooming included, here we've got a little nail cleaner and a number of copper alloy rings, non-complete. This one has lost its, and that one, it's intaglio. Bracelets and omelettes. This was an almost complete one. The fastenings had gone, but otherwise that was complete. Copper alloy and Kimmeridge shale bracelets. Beads, little faience beads, so tiny. We only retrieved those from soil sampling, but we had glass beads and a very rare copper alloy bead and one earring. I don't wear earrings, but I would think if you're an earring wearer, if you lose one earring, it's worse than not having earrings at all. Brooches, quite a lot of brooches, including a strip bow fibula dating 25 to 50. This is an iron brooch, and it's a military brooch, as is the Millefiori disc type brooch, which dates between 100 and 200. And I've just illustrated a dolphin type of the 1st century, a T-shaped of the same date, and a later plate type of the 2nd century. It would say, when we did the post-excavation work and started looking at the finds, it became apparent that hunting had been something that was taking place on this villa site from its inception until people were no longer living there in the 500s and 600s. And we have deer bone, hare, rabbit, birds, and waterfowl. This is a deer skull, and the rack of antlers has been sawn out. And my bone expert wondered whether they had been kept and put on the wall, as they used to do in posh houses years ago. We have evidence for hunting. These are ceramic slingshots. And I've put this little picture from, it's a mosaic, and you can see they're hunting with a net. We had a net mending needle. We had gaming with bone, glass, pottery, and metal counters. And here I've got a bone counter and a glass counter, and this is a mosaic showing men at gaming. These are masculine sports. Is our villa, is it a hunting lodge? Is this why it stays small? And this is where the elite men came to spend their weekends and their weeks off. Crafts were taking place at the villa. This is a woodworking, a comb, a carding comb. It's not in very good condition, but you can see the teeth where it worked the wool. We have a loom weight, and we have a number of spindle walls. These ones are made from pieces of pottery, and this one is a shale spindle wall. And an ordinary sewing needle. This is an iron needle, but the piece de resistance, in fact, this is a leatherworking needle, and you can see from the size of it, it's about 15 centimeters long and absolutely fabulous, made out of copper alloy. So woolworking and leatherworking. The prize find from the site, in my opinion, is this little folding knife, and it was broken and deposited in a ditch fill. This is the drawing, and it depicts a lion's head and paw. This is carved out of bone. It has a copper alloy ferrule, and it has an iron blade, and you can see where it's broken over here. It has been conserved, but it resembles a table leg, and the table leg is in the Dorchester Museum in Dorchester, and it came from a shale table. And this is from, I think it's the Reich, from a museum in Holland, and it's from a sarcophagus, and you can see one of these little three-legged table in the interior of the sarcophagus. So these designs were empire-wide, but ours is small but beautifully marked. Literacy. Mark Corney wondered whether the villa may have been used as a tax collection and administrative centre. We certainly have stylus. This is a bone stylus, and we have one or two metal stylus, but we also have a number of seal boxes. Unfortunately, we only have the bases. This is just to show you what it possibly would have looked like, and this did not come from our site, but official documents were sealed with such boxes. And there was literacy on the site. This is a black burnished ware cooking jar, and someone has inscribed their name on that jar. It's a bit like the office where you have your own coffee cup and your name is on it, and woe betide anyone who might use your cup. A number of military fittings were recorded, and these were probably attached to things like boxes. So we've got this pelter design here, and this is a little stud, all copper alloy. But the major find was this, and it's silvered copper alloy, fabulous design. It dates to about 390, and it's from this sort of military fitting, and it's very, very high status. My artist rolled it out so you can get the full idea of the design, but very rare, but indicating that the military may still have had an interest in this villa right at the end of the Roman period. We had items of security, keys and locks for fairly substantial doors, as well as a ring key from a very small box. Iron objects were made on the site, and I have illustrated a chain, an awl, a door pivot, a T-clamp. This is associated with underfloor heating, and it came from the ancillary building, and a hammer. No farming tools. This was not a farm. We have evidence for transport. We had 2 nave hoops and rings from a wheel, indicating that they came from perhaps a little chariot which looked like that. Was that to get our documents back and forward, and our people who were living there back and forward to the proper administrative centre in Dorchester? Lots of evidence for footwear. The ubiquitous hobnails. This was interesting because it was the sole of a boot and it had been reinforced with iron. And you can see the little hobnails in here. There's a very, very similar boot which came from Chichester. And an impression of a shoe in plaster. I have a size 4 foot and it fitted me perfectly. Washing facilities, well, I've discussed the possibility of a bathhouse. This is our villa, is here, the ancillary building here, and this is the River Piddle. There was a spring in this field here. So was there a bathhouse, and are these the sort of people who used it? The elite would have had expensive clothing which needed washing, and it's assumed that urine was collected, and it would have been collected in the black burnished ware pots, and that was used to whiten the togas to keep the linen white. And large stones from the excavation, smooth stones, would have been used to smooth out the linen and the wool after it had been laundered. 237 coins were retrieved, and about half of them were retrieved by our metal detecting team. Our earliest coin dated to Tiberius, 14 to 37, and the latest coins came from the House of Theodosius, 388 to 402, but a great variety of coins in between. Beliefs. We have a number of finds which perhaps shed a little light on what people believed in at the time. This is a coin of the Empress Salanina, 253 to 268, and it's been pierced. The emperors, of course, were worshipped, and that coin would have been probably worn around the neck as an indication that the emperor's family were deified and worshipped as gods. Small children, this is a squashed bell. Small children were often given bells to wear, and that was supposed to make sure that they were kept safe. In our ditches, we had large numbers of horse and cow skulls deposited, which were placed on the bottoms of these ditches. And I'm sure that that must have had meaning to the people who deposited these things when they went in. And of course, our room N3, when it was infilled, the body of an owl was deposited on the floor there. My husband is pointing out that it's 8:30 and I ought to be ending, and I think I've got about 3 slides left. The swastika emblem on the floor was a symbol of good fortune, and we had a little stud with what looks like a Cairo motif. However, this came from a very early context, so I don't think that that was the case. Copper alloy with, and it had been coloured black, but again, a coin dating to the 300s, the later 300s, with the motif displayed. Now, room N3, when it went out of use and before the roof fell in, this deposit was placed where the blue star is. It's the skull of a cow. Its horns had been chopped off.
and a very large cockle shell had been placed in its eye. A big iron nail had been placed in its neck, and a roof tile had been placed perhaps where a mouth may have been. And the excavators said it had Mick Jagger lips. And looking at that, I can see why. In Dorset, we have, it was a 19th century costume in North Dorset, and it's called the Dorset Osier. And it was displayed in and around Shaftesbury and Sherborne in the north of the county. And the tradition of that goes back many, many centuries. Was this the beginning of it? I don't know. Life continued at the villa after the Romans left, and we have evidence, pottery evidence, going up to about 650. The pottery deteriorates, but we do have a little buckle which dates to that period. And our last piece of pottery is a late Roman one amphora made in the Eastern Mediterranean and dating to about 550. The blue squares show where this sort of pottery has been found, but this is the furthest east, and it's indicating that wine is still coming in, and there's trade at that date as well. So incredibly interesting. The last days, the villa decayed and was abandoned and collapsed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a very, very abbreviated story of Druce Villa. The findings were produced as a bar monograph in 2022. And you can see my list of contributors, and I'm really sad to say that the ones outlined in yellow have subsequently died, and huge loss to archaeology. I'm just so grateful that we managed to get all of our reports in and published. It was a fabulous site to work on, and I had wonderful, wonderful people who helped with writing it up, but all of those fabulous volunteers who excavated over the years we worked there. Thank you very much.